Rabbi Spiro for coming in. It's not so often that we get live classes. Nowadays, thank you so much for coming. Rabbi Spiro, I'm sure you're going to introduce yourself, but famed historian, rabbi, author of Crash Course in Jewish History, Destiny and Born Perfect.
Hey guys, maintain social distancing. I gotta check the I had two firsts today. I just guided for the first time since March, 2 hours. This is the first time I'm teaching a live audience. I'm not looking at a computer monitor doing a Zoom class. Wow. So I'm like, for an extrovert, this is like overload sensory for me here. Anyway, I was asked to come in and do live. I'm so excited. I wanted to do like a little history of the 9th of Av, crash course on the 9th of Av. First of all, there's a lot of information I'm going to throw out now, and you look at all the dates here. Don't worry about it. Someone should photograph it, share it. Yeah. It's all on my website. I'll be happy to give you guys. I got a great website. You can take the card after, and all my material in detail. If you want to read about more of this stuff, it's all there. But I wanted to run through 9th of Av in history. You know, we Jews are the people who introduced the idea that time. First of all, that there's determinism in history, right? That we're not just randomly stumbling through a series of events, that there's a creator who knows and controls everything. This is a huge innovation in how the world looked. We introduced a very important idea that we interact with that creator. We're not just, like the pagans believe, just plugged into a story and they're cynically using us like puppets, and if you go against your fate, that's the subplot of all Greek tragedy, is the futility of fighting against your fate. It's like swimming upstream if you're a salmon, you know the salmon that swim upstream, what happens at the end? They spawn, they die, you're exhausted. So that's not what you wanted. So we introduced the idea that there is an infinite being who acts in history, and that we get to interact with that being. There's free will involved, and our decisions matter. We also introduced the idea that time has energy, which is why Shabbat. I'm FFA, by the way. You guys heard of BT, Balchuba? Yeah. An FFB, from birth, someone who's raised religious. I'm FFA, from Aish. I'm one of the oldest surviving Aish people left in this organization. Literally, I've been in Aish 38 years. I came for 3 months. Like they say, the Eagles in Hotels California. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. Anyway, not to scare you guys, but you can't leave. I hear you're allowed to go out of the building, We didn't take your passport, we just introduced COVID-19. Anyway, but we introduced this idea that time has energy, like Shabbat. If you were born not keeping Shabbat, random day. But once you start keeping Shabbat, you realize it's a great opportunity. There's an energy in that day which you can't get the other 6 days. But we have patterns that are in history. They repeat themselves, for better and for worse. Just as the holidays like Passover and Sukkot and Shavuot, there's a certain opportunity for growth that you can tap into and download and upgrade that you can't do the rest of the year. So too, even the negative side of Jewish history. I'm sure you guys heard that funny joke. A summary of all Jewish holidays. They tried to kill us. We won. Let's eat. Yeah, it was like the Passover for sure. And then the fast days. They tried to kill us. They won. Let's fast. There's negative energy in the time of year. We're not locked into it, by the way. The difference between good and bad prophecy is very important when you read the Bible. What's the difference between one makes you smile, the other you need Prozac to deal with? Good prophecy is guaranteed. Like the Messiah is going to come. How, when? And I don't know. If I knew that I'd be a prophet, I was a prophet, I'd be working in Wall Street and not teaching you guys. But bad prophecy is conditional. It can be avoided. And even though there's, I don't want not to bring in the Eastern stuff, but there's bad karma certain times of the year. We're in the bad karma time of the year here. The 9 days is very bad time. And it culminates on what's going to be on Wednesday night, Thursday, which is the 9th of Av. And even though there's bad energy there, we're not trapped in the bad energy. As a matter of fact, on Tisha B'Av, I'm getting ahead of myself, but you don't say Tachanun on Tisha B'Av, because we're told that in the end of days after Mashiach, it's going to be a big party day. It's going to be turned into a day of joy and happiness. So the question we want to take out of this, besides going through the history, is what can we do to flip it over? Because like I said, there's a God who controls history, but we're not just scripted into a story. There's things that we can do, and we're supposed to be learning from these events, unlike other cultures that only have history as a commemoration, a holiday as a commemoration of a past historical event. Is everyone here American? Any non-Americans? Who's a non-American? You're Canadian, aren't you? Anyone? There's no Brits here or anything? No. We scared them all off? Okay, I can make British lines. Like the British have a holiday, Guy Fawkes Day, V is for Vendetta, that's where they get blowing up the parliament from. Only the British have like a national holiday commemorating a terrorist attack on their seat of government. Go Google Guy Fawkes after the class. Anyway, but there might be bad energy in these days, but we believe that it's not just commemorating a past event. We're supposed to learn and grow, and not just grow personally, but hopefully collectively act in a certain way that will enable us to change the course and turn what is bad into good stuff. So what I'm going to do now is I want to run through the history really quickly. There's so much stuff. There's so many events that are connected with the 9th of Av. I'm going to mention them all in the beginning, but we're not going to focus on all of them because that would take hours. And I really just want to focus on 3 of them, which are right up here. Destruction of the first temple, destruction of the second temple, and Blackhawk Revolt and the fall of the city of Beitar. But to go back to the beginning, certain energy is put in the world by creation, like God, Rosh Hashanah, but certain energy, the negative stuff especially, we put in the world because of actions that happen on those days. Tisha B'Av was not supposed to be intrinsically a bad day. By the way, the 17th of Tammuz, which is a fast day we had not that long ago, was supposed to be the happiest day in the Jewish calendar, probably, or one of the happiest days. What happened on the 17th of Tammuz? Anyone know what happened? Why it's a fast day? Yeah, Moses comes down from Mount Sinai. This is like 40 days after God said, don't worship idols, and all the Jews are dancing around a cow. Come on, give me a break. We could ask a lot of questions on that story, even though we know it was only 3,000 out of 3 million people, whatever. Collective responsibility, not our topic. But it should have been the day when what happened? We got Torah. So it'd be like, whoa, this is the culmination, this is zenith of Jewish history. We heard God speak, He gave us the Torah. And then the next thing we should have done, by the way, is what? Now that we got the Torah, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to do? Not hang out in yeshiva forever. Right now, you're stuck here now. You're supposed to go to the land of Israel, which is the only place where you can actualize Torah, 100%, and go live there. What day should that have been? The 9th of Av. The 9th of Av was the day when what happens in this? Where's the first bad energy put in the day? When do we flip it from good to really bad? The darkest day in Jewish history. Yom Kippur is the heaviest fast, but it's not a bad day. Yom Kippur we fast because we're not physical, we're spiritual. Tisha B'Av is a full day fast. There's a lot of fast days. By the way, if you study Jewish history, there's many fast days we don't keep anymore. Why? Because Jews can't go that many days without eating. Imagine if like Muslims, they go for 30 days, forget it. Jews would quit like in one day. We get post-traumatic stress disorder. That's the Yiddish word for pigging out. So, no, but the rabbis didn't want to have us fast that many times, so they often would condense many events into a day, which was maybe not the exact correct day for all the events, but close enough. But so too with Tisha B'Av, a lot of bad things happen either directly on that day or extremely close to that day. But the first thing that happens on that day, which flips it from the good day to the bad day, is the spies coming back from the land of Israel. I should have done a source sheet. I usually do hand it out. I have my own little sources here. Next year, please God, I'll print it out so you can all look at it. But it says in Bar Midbar, in the Numbers, it says that the Jews go into the land of Israel, and they say, they're too strong for us. They come back, the spies. Remember, 12 go in, 10 come back and badmouth the land, Dibat Haaretz. The land as we cross to explore is a land that consumes its inhabitants. All the men we saw were huge. While we were there, we saw giants. We felt like tiny grasshoppers. That's all we were in their eyes. By the way, not to go into a Bible class, but there's a great question we could ask on this. This is the generation that had just, like a year before, experienced what? Think about it.
Slavery.
Not just slavery, but we experienced the greatest empire on the planet Earth, like Russia, China, U.S., all combined into one, completely destroyed by 10 supernatural plagues. Then we watched where the sea split and their entire army was consumed by giant waves that came back over and drowned them. And we're worried about a bunch of Canaanites who look like Shaquille O'Neal. Come on, guys. That's an interesting question. I don't want to get into it. But the problem is, for whatever reason, and maybe I'll talk about it at the end, we decided we're too scared, we don't want to go into the land, we're not interested. God says you're crying on this day for no good reason. There was 2 punishments. One was immediate, which was what?
40.
The 40 years of wandering the desert, because people like to say, I'm a tour guide also. None of the men would ask for directions, that's why we wandered for 40 years. But it's because we badmouthed the land of Israel. What's the long-term punishment that we're still sitting in and suffering through today? God says, it's like I remember as a little kid, your mother would drag you to the supermarket and you'd like whinge and whine and embarrass her because everyone thinks she's an abusive parent and you're actually just being an obnoxious 3-year-old. And you're crying and then your mom goes, I'll give you what to cry about, God says you're crying on this day for no good reason. You could have gone in and taken it all easily. I'll give you what to cry about. So any number of terrible things, bad energy is going to be planted on that day, and because God controls history, and it's the great interplay between our collective free will, the mistakes we make, and God's control of time, that he will make sure that a lot of really bad stuff's going to happen on that day. So guys, fast forward to 3,330 years, which is how long it's been since that story first happened. And by the time we get to where we are in 2020, we got what to cry about on Tisha B'Av. So first of all, we have the spy story. But then we have the destruction of the first temple. And to run you through the history, this happens at the very end of the first temple period. Remember, it took, by the way, we were 440 years from the time we finally entered the land, after the 40 years of wandering, till we finally conquered Jerusalem. And it's only 480 years after we leave Egypt that we build what's called the first temple. That's a lot of time. Can you imagine that? Like, we deal with spans of time that are so short. You know, like the British say, American history is an oxymoron. What's an oxymoron? Two words that don't go together, like jumbo shrimp. You know, like that, like pretty ugly. French military victories. So the British would say American culture, then I would shoot back, yeah, British cooking. But when you have a country whose history is less than 300 years old, it's not really like history, it's kind of new stuff. But we had these massive periods of time of history, the Jewish people. So 480 years after we leave the land of Egypt, we build after we leave Egypt, we finally, having lived in the land for 440 years, we finally are able to build the first temple. We go through a series of kings. I don't want to do all the history, we'll just never get through it. We start with King Saul, right? Then King David conquers Jerusalem. Then he has his son Solomon, and Solomon picks a bad successor, his son Rehoboam, who makes mistakes. Israel splits into two countries, and it's all downhill from there. By the time we get to 533 BCE, and I just want to cover this, go through this quickly, because this is the narrative, at least the destruction of the first temple. We have a king called Manasseh. Manasseh is actually the son of one of the most righteous kings of the Jewish people, whose name is? Hezekiah. Who said Hezekiah? 10 points you get. Very good. Hezekiah. Okay, it's right. Hezekiah. This is bad seed from a good apple. He's a terrible, 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 terrible human being. He does the northern kingdom of Israel, which is already a separate country, like America during the Civil War. And if you guys are saying, what the heck is he all talking about? I have no idea. Trust me. You want to read this. Okay? Makes my bank account happy, makes my mother happy. And it's the best way to learn Jewish history in a short period of time. Seriously. Shameless plug. So, shameless plug, exactly. I'm all into shameless plugs. Especially when I'm like on unpaid leave, you know? No, but seriously. From out of a very great king comes a very bad king. The northern kingdom, which had split from the southern kingdom many years earlier and had been corrupted by idolatry, and has already gone into exile because of their misbehavior, because this is the big lesson, guys. Anywhere in the land of Israel, our ability to live in the land collectively is dependent on our keeping the Torah. We have a contractual agreement. This is a no-brainer. It's not a big secret why bad things happen to us. We say it every day in the second paragraph of the Shema. If you listen and do what you're supposed to do collectively, then God keeps his side of the bargain. The northern kingdom didn't, so they're exiled and disappear. You know the 10 lost tribes? Mm-hmm. And where are these guys? Some people think they're in Passaic, New Jersey. It's not true. There's hundreds of millions of people who think they're descended from them, including the Taliban, by the way, who are called the Jewish Muslims. There's 25 million of these Pashtun guys. I want to convert them all and bring them back. Can you imagine the army we would have? Like, go ahead, Iran, and make my day. You know, we'll send our 25 million Pashtun against them. Anyway, the northern kingdom goes into exile, but it says Manasseh comes along, and his father was such a righteous king, the Torah says that God wanted to make him the Messiah, but for various reasons that didn't happen. But his son was evil to the core. And it's interesting, it says in 2 Kings, and this whole period of time is the book of Kings. The later books of the Bible that no one reads, by the way. Very sad. It's amazing how many people. I've been on a 10-year quest to find a guy in yeshiva who's actually read through all of Nach.
Yeah, we got one.
Who's read? You've done it? You're the guy! You're 2 for 2. You get a beer from me. Seriously. Unbelievable. Wow. It's amazing. Most I can't even finish Shas. They don't even read Nach. Anyway, they have. No, it's amazing. This is better than Game of Thrones. I'm telling you, it's amazing stuff. It doesn't have dragons, but it's got everything else. It says in 2 Kings chapter 21, because Manasseh, king of Judah, has committed these abominations, and he caused even Judah to sin with his idols, just like all the horrible kings did up in the north, like Ahab and Isabel, and all those terrible people in the northern kingdom of Israel. I will wipe out Jerusalem as one would wipe a plate thoroughly and turn it upside down. How's that for an image? God's going to take the kingdom of Judah, in the garbage, turn it upside down, knock it out, and chuck it out. Which, by the way, is huge because this is the other thing we have to understand when we're looking at Jewish history. Any of you guys play chess? Any chess players? What's chess about? I can't. I'm way too ADD to play chess, but I'm way too hyper. What's chess about?
Man's relationship with God.
Chess?
That's what you just learned about.
I never got that answer. Seriously, what's chess about? Chess is about seeing ahead, planning your moves ahead. That's the greatness of chess. I don't know where that came from. Still like
That's the last lecture.
Sorry?
The last lecture.
Okay, I'm still on rewind.
Bro, Zucker just spoke about it.
There you go. So he's talking about chess? A man's relationship with God? I'm gonna have to ask him what he was talking about. But yeah, God is always seeing ahead. We have to appreciate that moves made now will set off reactions that, for better and for worse, will often only actualize themselves hundreds of years later. He begins a downward decline. Our ability to stay in the land of Israel is dependent on collective action, sort of like your ability to stay in business is dependent on your bank account. When it's in the black, it's okay, but as it starts to decline towards zero and into the red, when it goes into minus far enough, then there's nothing left to withdraw, then the bank shuts you down. And he starts a process that's going to lead to a decline. We're going to have Manasseh as an incredibly evil king who introduces idolatry and all this terrible stuff and tries to destroy Judaism, literally. And then we have his son Amnon, who's also terrible. We get a guy named Josiah, who's the last little ray of hope. He's actually a very righteous king, Yoshiyahu HaMelech. He fixes up the temple. There's a story about how he finds a book. They destroyed all the copies of the Torah. He finds the book of Deuteronomy, hidden. He reads it to the Jewish people. Unfortunately, he makes the mistake. Remember, Israel were always sandwiched between. Israel's in a bad place historically. It's sort of like being Belgium. My joke definition of Belgium. In case you have guys haven't figured out I'm pretty politically incorrect, but I'm trying to stay on target here. My joke definition of Belgium is the country used by Germany to invade France. So it's sort of like what Israel is, the country used by like Assyrian Babylon to invade Egypt, or Egypt to invade Assyrian Babylon. We're the battleground. So Pharaoh Necho of Egypt decides he's going to go fight the Assyrians, and he says Josiah, I'm marching my army through your country. Just stand aside and let me pass through. And Josiah says, no way. He comes out to fight him, and he's killed in 445. These are all minus numbers. I'm using the Christian calendar years here. This is 445 BCE. Okay, then you have for 3 months, you have a guy named Jehoaz ben Yoshiyahu. He only reigns for 3 months. And then he's gone. He's deposed. Now, by this period of time, then you're going to have a guy by the name of Jehoiachim ben Josiah. He's the son of Josiah. He's going to reign for 11 years. The prophet during this period of time, guys, is the prophet Jeremiah, who was the ultimate party pooper in Jewish history. Because all he's doing, these guys had a really rough time. All they're doing is telling the Jewish people, you're doing it all wrong. And no one wants to listen to them, and some of these prophets get killed. Like Uzziah and Zechariah and Yeshayahu, Isaiah. These guys are murdered, actually. So they had a very tough time. But he's the prophet of gloom and doom, because from here onward, the damage that's begun by Manasseh, and remember, we're not talking about economic damage, we're not talking about lack of paying the stimulus money out to the right people, we're talking about the moral, spiritual damage of not keeping our side of the bargain is going to be further exacerbated by all the last kings of Judah. And the bigger political background situation here is a rivalry between first Assyria, which is an area called Mesopotamia. Where's Mesopotamia? It sounds like an animal you find in Africa. Hippopotamus and Mesopotamia. What is Mesopotamia?
It's like the
It's
region.
the land between the two rivers, which is not the Hudson and the Mississippi. It's the Tigris and the Euphrates. Which country is that today, by the way? It's Iraq. We all know where Iraq is. Like Ambrose Bierce, who wrote during the American Civil War, one of my favorite quotes. He said, "War is God's way of teaching Americans geography." So there's always this great rivalry between Egypt, the most continuous superpower in the ancient world, in the south, and Mesopotamia, which will first be Assyria, and then in the middle of this, Babylonia, which starts out as a vassal state, Bavel of Assyria, will rise up, just like Rome rises up and takes over Greece, and it used to be a colony of Greece. Babylon will become this major world power at this time, and they'll become the superpower. So it's during the time of Jehoiachim ben Yoshiyahu. He reigns for 11 years. Jeremiah is the prophet. He will rebel, and he will be taken away into exile. He dies on the way going into exile. The Babylonians were a vassal state of these big empires. Like if you remember the Cold Wars before your guys' time, but countries like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary were all like client states of the Soviet Union and their empire. They really didn't have independence. If they tried to rebel, like in You know, in 1982, Poland tried to break free and the Russian army invaded. I know this because I was a student in Moscow at the time. We had Polish girls in our dorm who couldn't call home and were freaking out. So, but that kind of stuff. So if you rebelled, like the train of thought that works in my brain is interesting. If you rebelled, the different powers that you were subject to their whims would come in and replace kings and do horrible things. They'd often loot, pillage, replace the king with a king that they liked. But that's exactly what happens here. Babylon will become the great world power. But again, we have to always distinguish as Jews between what's going on geopolitically and which is the noise that distracts us, and always recognize that even what's going on with the superpowers is also a byproduct of who? The big guy upstairs and our relationship with him. There's all kinds of interesting stories in the Talmud talking about how literally the rise and fall of whole empires is only to set things up in a bigger story. And maybe they're inconsequential, even if they're superpowers, because somehow they're going to interact with us somewhere. Because when we chose for ourselves a unique responsibility, going all the way back to Abraham, we are the lead actors in the drama. And even though we might be one of the smallest of nations, we always play a huge role in human history, which we often only see after the fact. So a lot of what's going on in the geopolitical realities and the big events that are the major news headlines of the time are really just background and setting the stage to come after us and punish us for what we're not doing in our relationship with God. So he sent it to exile, he dies on the way out to exile. Then you have his son, Yehoiachin ben Yehoiachim. They do this just to make our life difficult. The only difference between these two guys' names is the last letter of their names. He is going to be in power for 3 months. At this period of time, Babylon now, unlike Egypt, which used to control a lot of the area, Babylon is now the major world power. The Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar, the emperor of Babylon, will come to Jerusalem. This is a decade before the destruction of the temple. He will remove Yehoiachin, take him into exile in Babylon. He will also take with him at the same time 10,000, do a lot of damage, like pillaging and stealing stuff from the temple. He'll take the 10,000 best and brightest out of the country with him, like a big brain drain. Which, by the way, at the time seemed terrible. But this is a great example of God playing the chess game and setting up things in advance, because one thing that has to always be guaranteed is what, guys?
Cure.
Sorry?
The cure.
The cure, that we have to survive. Even if there's only 6 of us left. Our role in history from Abraham onward is too central. How many of us are left? How quickly? How slowly? How painfully? How painlessly? That's up to decisions we make. But one way or another, we're going to get there. The question is what shape we'll be in, and that depends on us. And you see it in this story. So at the time, taking out the 10,000 best and brightest CEOs and biggest university professors, in this case we're talking about the biggest rabbis, seemed like a big disaster. But when we fast forward to 10 years later, the temple is destroyed and the Jews are exiled. And remember, exile is something we're now used to dealing with. Exile is pretty comfortable if you're living in, like, Pico Robertson. There's like 50 kosher restaurants within like 400 yards of each other. Exile was never so good. But exile wasn't always so comfortable. Trust me, you end up living in Seattle where there's one vegan Indian restaurant and you're trying to be frum. That's enough to turn Jews off to Yiddishkeit altogether. So exile was not always so comfortable. When Jews come to America between 1882 and 1914, there's no infrastructure. There's no butchers, there's no mikvahs, there's no yeshivas, there's no rabbis, there's no nothing. What happens to all those Jews? They all assimilate. That's the story of most Eastern European Jews, if your great-grandparents came from Eastern Europe between 1882 and 1914. In this case, when we get to Babylon 10 years later, what do we find? Who's already been there for the last decade? The best guy setting everything up. Like the bagel store is there, it's unbelievable. The mikvah, the yeshivas. No, seriously, it's the silver lining in the very dark cloud. Well, we have Zedekiah, we have the last king put in power after Yehoiachin, who reigns for only 3 months, is Zedekiah. And he's a terrible king. He's listening to false prophets, like taking bad advice from bad investors. This stock's going to go through the roof, and then the next day it goes from $1,000 a share to like 15 cents. They're all screaming, Mikdash, Heichal Hashem, the temple's going to save us. The big lesson we have to listen to collectively at this time, which is what Jeremiah is saying to the Jewish people at the time, is, guys, the temple's not going to protect you. It's not a good luck charm. And he's saying you got to take care of the widows, the orphans, the downtrodden, the oppressed. And this is a great lesson for us. This is the lesson we got to take when we're thinking collectively as Jews, because Judaism is mitzvahs between us and God, like kashrut, Shabbat, that kind of stuff. and there's mitzvot between us and our fellow human beings. Charity and and being proper court systems and all that other stuff, and loaning money to people in need. And God's saying, you Jews, and by the way, this is a big problem the Jewish world has today. Being hyper focused on, you gotta be twice as careful what comes out of your mouth as what you put in your mouth. These guys who are so religious, they're eating the super kosher food, but then they'll say Lashon Hara. Seriously, it's a big problem in the Jewish world today. You have to always weigh the stringencies you're gonna take upon yourself to try and maintain your holiness, and how they're going to affect other human beings. You know what I mean? It's a big thing. I could do a whole class on this. I kind of rave about this all the time, how bad it is. Because anything in the Hebrew Bible, guys, is only there because it's written by a prophet, and the message is relevant throughout all of Jewish history. Jeremiah might have been talking to King Zedekiah and the Jewish elite of 2,500 years ago, but he's speaking to us today. Super important lesson. Anyway, they don't listen. Jeremiah writes the book of Lamentations, Eicha, we're going to read on the ninth above. It's sent to the temple, by the way. And the king reads it, tears it up, and throws it in the fire. By the way, that wasn't even this king. That's already going back to him. That's how much before he was already warning them. He writes the book again. And they're so upset with him, they throw him in prison. They want to kill him. In the end, he's not killed, but he spends the last period of time of this First Temple period rotting as a prisoner. Meanwhile, Zedekiah rebels. The Babylonians come against Jerusalem. They besiege the city for 3 years. A terrible famine breaks out. And by the way, the city of David, I should do you guys a trust. I was just down there. I took my first guiding in 4 months. I took a family down there. There's a house destroyed when Jerusalem was destroyed 2,500 years ago. Nice fancy house. It had a kitchen, indoor plumbing, a toilet. When they excavated the house in the 1970s, they lifted up the toilet. It's just amazing. It's like a 300-pound toilet seat. It's like a woman's dream toilet. The seat was always down. And the last guys who used the toilet didn't clean it out after. And they took the poo out of the toilet and analyzed it. I know it sounds kind of gross, but even that is interesting, believe it or not. After 2,500 years, Josias, a paleopathologist, analyzed. You know what they found? They found it contained massive amount of grass. Why would you eat grass?
Nothing else.
Nothing else to eat. And a parasite only found in meat eaten raw. Why is the meat eaten raw? Because there's no wood. You don't want to think of what kind of meat it is. If you read the book of Lamentations, it describes women eating their own children. It's amazing, even in the archaeology, we find the seals, the clay seals that sign the documents from the people mentioned in the book of Jeremiah. It's amazing what's down there. But the Jerusalem is destroyed, and the description here is quite scary. It says, in the book of Eicha, Lamentation, it says, the tongues of suckling infants cleave to its palate from thirst. Young children beg for bread. No one extends it to them. Those who once feasted extravagantly lie destitute in the streets. Those who are brought up on scarlet cloth wallow in garbage. Their appearance has become blacker than soot, and they are not recognized in the streets. Their skin is shriveled on their bones. It became dry as wood. Hands of the compassionate mother have boiled their own children. They become their food when the daughters of my people were shattered. It's like really scary stuff. He's writing this prophetically as what's going to be in the future. And a city that goes through a 3-year siege, that's exactly what happens. The people are starving to death, resorting to cannibalism. The Babylonians will breach the walls of the city, pour into the city, destroy the temple. This is 850 years after we'd entered the land of Israel. Imagine how long we had been in the land of Israel. 440 years before the temple, 410 years with the temple. Again, today we deal with diaspora as a normal thing. None of you guys were born in Israel, right? Sure, I live in diaspora. But imagine everything you remember for 840 years was you always lived in the land of Israel. We had for almost half a millennia a temple, and now it's gone. And by the way, the Talmud, which always gives us the critics' take on what really is going on, asks, why was the first temple destroyed? And it's important to understand, because the geopolitical analysis would be the first temple was destroyed because the Jews, not recognizing the superpower and hegemony of the Babylonian Empire, stupidly rebelled while listening to bad strategic analysis of this, whatever. But what's the reality? Why was it destroyed? The Talmud says, that's the smokescreen. It was destroyed because the Jewish people violated the 3 cardinal sins of Gilui Arayos, which is illicit sexual relations, Shfichas Damim, murder, like they were just violent. It doesn't mean every Jew is, and worshiping idols, which is the full spectrum of not having the relationship with God and not having a relationship with each other. Again, the lesson is clear. It doesn't mean all the Jews were doing this, sleeping with their neighbors' wives, killing their neighbors, and then worshiping idols. No. But we have a very important idea in Judaism, which is huge, of collective responsibility. And when a critical mass of Jews, I don't know what percentage of it, is doing that, and all Jews are responsible for each other, and we're not proactively. By the way, Judaism's big on this, guys. You're either part of the problem or part of the solution. If you stand by and do nothing, you're guilty by association. It's a very big Jewish idea. So then we go into exile for 70 years according to Jeremiah the prophet. After 70 years, we come back. Nehemiah, Ezra, we have a second temple period, which is 349 BCE. The second temple is completed. By the way, an amazing event. No nation ever goes into exile, comes back, and reestablishes its holy site. The first 12 years of the second temple period are Persian domination of the Middle East, because the Babylonian Empire was overrun by the Persian Empire. That's where the story of Purim takes place, in exile. But after that, a world power appears, Alexander the Great. 331 BCE, he embarks on the greatest military campaign in the ancient world, taking 45,000 men over 10,000 miles and dismembering the greatest superpower in the world, who was outnumbered 10-1, destroying the Persian army. Incredible story of a military genius. Nutty guy. It says he dies at age 32, complete maniac. Of God knows what he died of. He had every kind of probably disease you could contract from wild partying and being wounded in battle so many times. But he said when he saw his empire, he cried there was nothing left to conquer. But part of what he conquers is the land of Israel. The Greeks will come to the Middle East. This is the first time we get to interact with European civilization. That leads to the first religious ideological war in history. We're the only monotheists back then. There's no Christianity, no Islam. Pagan Greek culture trying to snuff out not Jews but Judaism. We have the Hanukkah Revolt. We beat the Greeks. We fight them to a standstill. During that time, we make a treaty with the Romans. The Maccabees' descendants will rule for 111 years. And in the year 63 BCE, when the last two surviving Maccabean brothers are fighting a war amongst themselves, we're always our worst enemy, they will call the Romans in to mediate, which is really stupid idea. It's like inviting Genghis Khan in, you know? You think he's going to leave? The Pompey Magnus, remember Pompey and Julius Caesar co-rule originally? Pompey shows up 63 BC, and the Romans come. Guess who's coming to dinner? And they stay. And they absorb Israel, which they named Judea, into their empire. This begins the most difficult relationship in the history of the Jewish people in the ancient world in the Second Temple period, which is the incredible relationship between the descendants of Esau, Rome, and the Jewish people. At the beginning of this period, the Romans will put into power a guy by the name of Herod the Great. You guys heard of him? The guy who built Masada and Caesarea and built the walls around Jerusalem and the Temple Mount platform and all that other cool stuff. He's a puppet king. He's a pretty incredible guy in good and bad ways, but he rules from 37 to 4 BCE. When he dies, the Romans more or less will go back to direct rule over the land of Israel, which was part of Greater Syria. There'll be two more descendants of Herod who will rule for a short period of time. Agrippus II, he's a pretty good guy actually. And Agrippus I, who's the great-grandson of Herod the Great. But this constant tension between us and Rome. Rome is the ultimate pagan empire. And in 66, and the Romans will settle a lot of non-Jews in the land of Israel. In 66 CE now, we're in the Common Era, at the end of the Second Temple period. The Caesarea, which is the Roman capital of Israel, the non-Jews will riot, trigger a pogrom against the Jewish community of Caesarea. That's going to spread. Remember, in the land of Israel at the time, the Jews are not united at this time. There's different factions of religious nationalists. They're called Sicarii and Biryonim. They're kind of like the hardcore settlers you get in Israel today, only much more violent and very ideological. The Sicarii got their name from little daggers they would carry underneath and stab their political opponents. Bad stuff. So you have a lot of tumult. The kingship is basically gone. The priesthood is corrupted in the first temple. Kingship was corrupted, but the priesthood was still pretty solid. Here, the only thing keeping the Jewish people together are the rabbis, the Sanhedrin, the Jewish Supreme Court, but they can't do it because the political power is out of their hands. The Romans are not giving it to them, and there's these different groups of fanatics. Eventually what happens is, because of what happened in Caesarea, the Jews in Jerusalem will revolt. They'll slaughter the Roman garrison. The Romans cannot tolerate revolt within their empire. The Romans ruled all of what is Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, with a grand total of 24 legions at their largest, which is a legion. Do the math. A legion is 5,300 men in the first century. Do the math. What's 5,300 times 24? Am I doing the math fast enough? Sorry? Am I doing the math fast enough? It's not a lot of people to rule a huge, massive empire. The Romans chose generally to rule through proxy rule, local king that we often put in power. You keep a law and order, we'll back you if necessary. But if a revolt breaks out, it can trigger. Imagine if the Romans had to deal with. Imagine like the U.S. has to deal with like 6 major, U.S. has, the biggest army by, the U.S. spends more on its defense budget than the next 15 countries in the world combined. Canadians, what do you learn from that? Don't declare war in America. Will wasn't thinking of it. Anyway, but if America had to deal with 6 major conflicts, they'd be stretched really thin. So when you rebelled against Rome, they followed a live and let live policy, but if you rebelled against them, they crushed you, which means they'd come in. We taught the world mercy and warfare, by the way. There's no such idea throughout human history until we introduced it of non-combatants and innocent people. The only people spared throughout all of human history in the ancient world were people who had value. Sometimes money, like nobility would be spared if we ransomed them, like kings and queens in medieval Europe. Value. Women and men to take as slaves, or whatever, people to feed to lions, whatever. So the Romans would crush you. They would slaughter your population, keep some of the best people to sell as slaves, destroy your cities, cut down the trees, even put salt in the earth so nothing would grow. So Titus and Vespasian, the father-son team, will start up north. 4 Roman legions will start up north, work their way through the country. This was not a united revolt. This was a divided revolt, guys. Certain cities surrendered to the Romans right away and didn't fight. Other cities, like Jerusalem, were going to hold out till the end. Any city that didn't surrender, starting with like Gamla in the north, which is the Masada of the north, the Romans would level the city and destroy everything. That's, by the way, Josephus. You know the Josephus story? You want to read about this. The great first century historian Flavius Josephus, who lived from the year 40 CE to the year 100. He was alive, he witnessed this, and he ends up writing an account of it called The Jewish Wars, which is an amazing history book to read. The Romans will work their way down to Jerusalem knowing, and by this time the city, which was twice the size of the city of today, guys, the walls of the city, the Russian compound? They found the walls, the northern walls of the city went all the way up past the Russian compound, the southern walls went all the way down to the city of David. This is the largest city in the Eastern Roman Empire, which probably had a population of about 150,000 people in a normal time, and the population probably swelled to 250,000 to 300,000 people within the walls of the city. The city had massive stockpiles of food, like the western walls. You see how big the stones are there? 4 to 40 tons on average. That's what the walls of the city. And Jews were like Japanese in the Pacific in World War II when they fought. The Japanese never surrendered. They would blow themselves up first before they surrendered. Kamikazes. I always wonder, why do those guys wear helmets? Anyway, so the Jews had massive supplies, tremendous fighting spirit. They're fighting for Jerusalem and their temple. But what happens? The Jews in the city, these different groups, Shimon Bar Giora, Yochanan Gush Chalav, they're fighting a civil war inside the city over who's going to be in charge. Is that stupid or is that stupid? If you think that's crazy, go watch the Knesset, when Knesset members have to be separated by the Knesset ushers over who's in charge and how we're going to deal with our enemies, the Arabs and stuff like that. Jewish people are always our worst enemy. It's ridiculous. Civil war in the city. The zealots even burn the food supplies in the city. Why do that? Because otherwise they're just going to sit behind the walls and wait, try and outlast the Romans. This way, out of desperation, they'll fight, which of course leads to another massive famine within the city walls. The Romans start breaching the walls, and the Romans are the masters of warfare. They had these catapults and ballista. I'll give you a souvenir, you got to give back to me. This is a ballista stone from the destruction of the Second Temple. You can pass it around the room. That is a small one. That Romans could shoot with a giant crossbow, 500 meters. They could shoot that pretty accurately. They had ones.
What's ballista?
I work in the city of David. It's a giant crossbow. It had like a slingshot.
And they let you have this?
Sorry? They let me have it, yeah.
Wow.
It's actually my sister got it. We dig together the city of David. And they were cleaning. She said, they have thousands of them. We dug that up and when we were digging. But they had ones that weighed 60 pounds. They could shoot 500 meters. So the Romans will breach the walls in the north, work their way into the temple, breach the walls of the temple in the north, which is why of all the 4 walls of the Temple Mount today, that's the one wall that's no longer there. The entire western wall is here. Most of it you can't see because the Muslims built up to it in the medieval period. The southern wall is there. Go to the Mount of Olives. You can see the eastern wall. They'll work their way on the Temple Mount. A huge battle. The Jews are desperately fighting to save the temple. Too little, too late. Now we stop fighting amongst ourselves, unite against the Romans, but it's like Israel fighting like the Warsaw Pact and NATO combined. The might of the Roman army is unleashed. The Romans will defeat the Jews on the Temple Mount, burn the temple to the ground, make their way up to the Jewish quarter, which falls, by the way, weeks later. The fighting goes on for weeks and weeks and weeks. It's over a 4-month siege from the time the Romans start the siege to the time they burn the temple. If you go right in the Jewish quarter by where the little supermarket is, you know the burnt house? You can go down there, and they found when they dug down, it's a really fancy schmancy house, maybe of Kohanim. They found a spear, they found a woman's arm. The skeleton. You go into Yeshivat HaKotel, they have a 400 square meter Rome villa, probably also of a family of Kohanim. And you can see the beams of the ceiling lying burnt on the floor still, where they hit the ground when they destroyed Jerusalem. Amazingly beautiful house. So by the time you get to the year 70, the Romans have destroyed the city of Jerusalem. The last few zealots will flee to Masada, which the 10th Roman Legion under Flavius Silva will besiege 3 years later. And after also a siege of about 4 months, Masada will fall, ending that revolt. So here you have the first, and when is the first temple destroyed on? The 9th of the year 422, 423, a little bit. And when is the second temple destroyed on? The 9th of the year 70. So here you have the two greatest tragedies in Jewish history coming out on the same date, when the Jews were crying in the desert way before, because we want to enter the land of Israel, and God says, I'll give you what to cry about. Fast forward, guys, even after the destruction of Jerusalem, there was still a large Jewish population in the land of Israel. The last event I wanted to give a little bit of attention to was Bar Kokhba, because you have year 70's destruction of the temple. In the year 90, Titus and Vespasian will go on to become emperors. They build that arch in Rome, Titus's arch. Anyone seen it in Rome? It's built by Diocletian, Titus's younger brother, in commemoration of the Roman victory. And on the inside there's a frieze. I meant to bring the pictures, I forgot. Did you know that? Here. It could be also the world's largest petrified matzo ball. I'm not sure. But on the inside you can see a frieze of the Roman legion marching, parading with the menorah. The menorah in the square in the Jewish quarter, that big gold, which is 40 kilograms of gold, by the way. It's not solid gold, because gold is soft metal, but it's got 40 kilograms, it's gold-plated, 40 kilograms of gold. The image, it's an exact copy of the image on the inside of Titus's arch, which depicts the victory parade that the Romans, when the Romans won a big victory, they would have a big parade, and they built the arch later as a commemoration. The Jewish community of Rome, by the way, traditionally never walked under that arch. The Jewish community of Rome goes back thousands of years before the destruction. On the night of May 14, 1948, what happened on May 14, 1948? Israel was founded as a state of 2,000 years. The Jewish community of Rome lined up and marched under the arch, away from the city of Rome, because where are the Romans today? They're gone. The Italians are not the Romans. How do you know that? Any historian will tell you that. Look how the Romans fought 2,000 years ago. Look how the Italians fought in World War II. And I love Italians, by the way, the nicest people on the planet. But these guys couldn't even beat the Ethiopians. I mean, barely. The Romans controlled the entire world for over 500 years. They were a superpower par excellence. But anyway, so we have the Roman Emperor Trajan comes along, 98 CE. This is already decades after the destruction of the temple. There's a lot of tension between Jews who were scattered throughout the Roman Empire. Even after the destruction, the majority of Jews in the Second Temple period, by the way, were living in diaspora. In Rome, in the biggest Jewish community in diaspora was not Brooklyn. Where was it? Alexandria in Egypt, which is the Nile Delta, had the largest library in the world. The city was 1/3 Jewish, had a synagogue that was so big that the Gabbai would wave a flag when it was time to answer, like Borchut to the Torah reading, because you couldn't hear it, because it was like the size of a football stadium. So the tension between the Jews and the pagans in the city of Alexandria explodes into, while the Romans are distracted, into a pogrom against the Jewish community of Alexandria, which is slaughtered. Tens of thousands of Jews. They try and do it to the Jews of Cyprus also. It's called Ketosis War. That does not happen on Tisha B'Av. In 117, Hadrian comes to power. Hadrian's Wall, he built that wall in England. This is the height of Pax Romana, the maximum expansion of the Roman Empire. After Hadrian initially starts out as being very pro-Jewish and very friendly to the Jews, even offering the Jews to rebuild the temple. But people poison his mind against the Jews, and in 123 he starts the Hadrianic persecutions, which are almost an exact copy of what happens in the Hanukkah story, where the Romans go after Judaism. Not only did that, Jews are banned. He decides to build on the site of Jerusalem, a temple to the Roman god Jupiter. Can you imagine? Jews, there's all kinds of stories. Josephus describes how Jews, where they tried to put like a Roman eagle on the temple. When the temple still stood at the time of Herod, the Jews said, we're all going to die rather than let you do that. That's how strong was the opposition to anything that was viewed as idolatrous. So it's probably the attempt to build to persecute Judaism and to build a temple on that site that triggers the biggest revolt in the history of the Roman Empire, which is called the Blackhawk Revolt. Unlike here, guys, this revolt is unified by a man is led by a leader by the name of Shimon Bar Koziva. And he unites the Jewish people around him. He even gets the backing, unlike here where the rabbis were basically standing on the sidelines and begging the Jews not to fight the Romans, just like Jeremiah is begging the Zedekiah not to rebel against the Babylonians because it's going to end in disaster. The biggest rabbi of that generation, Rabbi Akiva, that's where Aish Torah gets its name from, by the way. He's the most famous Baal Tshuva just about of anyone. He's the one who sees the water dripping on the rock as a shepherd. When he's 40 years old and he says if water can make an indent in the rock, then the fire of Torah, Aish Torah, can make an indent in my soul. You guys all know that story? Okay, just checking. So Rabbi Akiva, who is the Gadol Ador, one of the most important rabbinic figures of the last 2,000 years, he backs Bar Kokhba as the Messiah. And that's where he gets the name Bar Kokhba, son of a star. His real name was Bar Koziba. The Jews unite, fight the Romans. The Romans get trashed initially, by the way. An entire Roman legion is destroyed in ambush. It's an amazingly successful revolt initially. The Romans pour more and more men. It took 4 Roman legions to crush the Great Revolt. We now know that it took all or part of 14 Roman legions to crush Bar Kokhba. The Romans only had 24 legions. That means the Romans had half the army of the entire Roman Empire had to be poured into the land of Israel to crush what was the biggest revolt in the history of the Roman Empire. But when the Romans finally, in the end, Bar Kokhba is forced back into the city of Beitar, which is not the, I call it Meisharim in the mountains, the Haredi city of Beitar. It's the horrible, nasty Arab village called Batir next to it. They're really nasty. I'm not being like racist here. No one's been able to even excavate there. Forget Jews, non-Jews, because they're very, very unfriendly. So it's an incredible archaeological site which has never been excavated because the people living there are so not nice. But in the city of Batir is the original Beitar. Beitar falls. When does Beitar fall? The 9th of Av. And that's really the end. First of all, after that, the Romans renamed Jerusalem Aelia Capitolina. They banned Jews from entering the city. They renamed the whole country Philistia, after the extinct Philistines, not the Goldsteins, the Philistines, who are not indigenous to here either, and they're not related to the modern Palestinians. This is the real end. This is the massive decimation of the Jewish community in the land of Israel. What was started here ends with this. So boom, boom, boom. You have 3 massively destructive events. By the way, I forgot to mention, but the Talmud, when talking about the destruction of the first temple, says that the first temple was destroyed because of the 3 cardinal sins, right, of murder, idolatry, and illicit sexual relations. It says, why was the second temple destroyed? And guys, we lived in the exile caused by the destruction of the second temple. Why was the second temple destroyed? Sinat chinam, causeless hatred of one Jew for another. Guys, what do you think's going on in the world today? You see the Sinat chinam going on?
Yeah.
This is one of the biggest lessons. By the way, a lot of other terrible stuff happened. You know, not to go through any more events in detail, but the expulsion of Jews from Spain took place on Tisha B'Av in 1492. Which is the expulsion of Jews in England did not, I don't think, took place on Tisha B'Av. But Spain did the start of World War I. There's a lot of different dates given, but the official declaration of war between Russia and Germany is Tisha B'Av. The expulsion of Jews of Spain is the destruction of the greatest diaspora community in the world. Imagine the Jews in America being told you have 6 months to get out of the country. Or, you know, it was a disaster of unparalleled proportions since the destruction of the temple. The start of World War I is really the start of what, guys? The start of World War II. Without World War I, there wouldn't have been a World War II. Germany wouldn't have been in the situation it would have been, and Hitler would not have gotten to power. And one out of every 3 Jews in the world would have been murdered. 9th of Av, 9th of Av, 9th of Av, 9th of Av, 9th of Av. Guys, we fast forward in history. Boy, do we have what to be crying about when we get to Tisha B'Av. But not to end on a sad note. I didn't even read all the quotes I had. Ali's quotes, and it's too much. But what do we take from this, guys? Bottom line is, besides that we got bad energy that we got to be aware of now, we got to flip it around and understand. Number 1 is we are living in the exile. I will be done in a minute. You guys got dinner now? Well, we'll be done. Sorry? I go for a couple more minutes? Yeah. Just a couple more minutes. I want to make a proactive close to this. We're living in the destruction of the second temple. We're living in diaspora, which may be comfortable, but is nonetheless. We have to always recognize that the differences amongst Jews, Ashkenazim and Sephardim and all the different things in different places, are all unfortunate byproducts of us living outside the land of Israel. We're only supposed to have one kind of Jew. We're all into being different, you know that. But one kind of custom and one Jewish lifestyle and one rabbinic authority for all of us, unity, that kind of stuff. But the second temple was destroyed because of Sinat Chinam. And guys, we're our worst enemies. We are anti-Semitism is at the highest. Everyone's distracted now by COVID-19, but you should know if you go to places like, anyone from LA here? You know, Fairfax, they trashed the stores there around there. And it wasn't just like, you know, random violence. It's scribbling, the intersectionality of Black Lives Matter with the Palestinian, stuff, and all this anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic stuff scribbled on, spray painted on Jewish stores and stuff. And even before all this was happening, guys, anti-Semitism is at the levels we haven't seen since the Holocaust. The attacks against Israel and delegitimatizing Israel are just another smokescreen. Israel bashing is the final form that anti-Semitism is taking in this world. There are literally millions and millions and millions of people who hate us, and we are still, like the Jews, trapped inside Jerusalem as the Romans are surrounding the walls, arguing and focusing on what separates us. But you notice the people who hate us don't distinguish between what kind of Jew we are. And it's going to be a big surprise to some of the self-hating Jews who are pushing an agenda that's even anti-Jewish and even anti-Israel. When it hits the fan, you think they're going to be saved? Even the capos who worked in the concentration camps, what happened to them in the end when the Germans had no more use for them? They ended up in the same gas chamber as everyone else. And I know I'm saying something very heavy, but it's an important lesson. Guys, we got to recognize that we need to make a paradigm shift now. We got a big, heavy, whatever goes on in the world, just like I talked about the big empires, and it all has to, on some level, do with us. We got a massive wake-up call between COVID-19 and all the stuff going on in America with the political instability and the last great superpower and bastion of Western democracies, the United States. I've never seen that country, as a historian, as unstable as this, not even the civil rights movement in the 60s, since the Civil War in the United States. But look at the Jewish community. We're tearing ourselves apart. Always, we're arguing, we're fighting. We got to make a paradigm shift, first and foremost, as we get to this time of year. If the temple was destroyed because of Sinat Chinam, we have to work on Ahavat Chinam. We have to change in our brains and start looking at our fellow Jews. I don't have to agree with you. You don't know, any parent knows, you don't always like your kids, but you always love them. That's why you're allowed to survive past being a teenager. So seriously, guys, but you're my brother, you're my sister. I don't mean literally biologically, although some of us are brothers and sisters. I can't talk to my brother. He thinks politically, I can't go anywhere 10 miles of him. Yeah, he's like raving about it. I don't want to go into it. But you're my brother. We all one giant family. My brother, my sister. We can agree to disagree, but we got to focus on what unites us, guys. Because the world needs role models. That's what the Jewish people is about. If we don't have our act together, if we are divided, the world will be divided. If we are unified, the world will be unified. If we're focusing our energy in the right way, the world will focus its energy in the right way. This is, and every one of us. Who's seen the movie The Tipping Point? The Pay It Forward. Pay It Forward. Such a great movie. It only takes every one of us doing a little to make a big difference. We gotta make that change in the few days we have left till Tisha B'Av. And we have to also recognize, like I said at the beginning, that human history is this interplay between our decisions and what goes on in the big guy upstairs. Physically, we have to understand, guys, that one of the prerequisites for the end of all the story, the rebuilding of the third temple, and the coming of the Messiah, which is all a package deal, which we really do want, guys, not just for us, but for the whole world, because in the whole world gets on one page and finally focuses and stops fighting and arguing, is the physical return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. One of the big mistakes we made as Jews is becoming way too comfortable in diaspora. And number two is passively waiting for redemption for the Messiah to show up. I understand why secular Jews who are disconnected from Judaism have not thinking about moving to Israel. Still today, it's appalling to me. It's like I'm stunned by how so many religious Jews continue to live outside the land of Israel. I don't understand how it's even possible. Yeah, and if you're still going to do it because, I don't have a job here, you should at least wake up and feel that it's my goal to always be in the land of Israel. Well, the two things we can do, guys, is number one, is to work on making that paradigm shift to get Jews for Judaism and some Jewish unity, and to proactively think about bringing those Jews back to the land of Israel, because it's pretty clear in my mind that if we reach a critical mass, and we are right on the cusp of having the majority of Jews back in the land of Israel for the first time in 2,000 years, then I'm pretty sure, again, I'm not a prophet, but I'm pretty sure when we get to the point where we really have more than 50% of the Jews living in the land of Israel, you're going to see big things change in the positive. Because that's going to start the ball rolling, like Malcolm Gladwell's tipping point, and we need to get to that tipping point. And when we get to that tipping point, then all the bad karma that's in this time of year, caused by all the bad events that were triggered by the stupid things we did in the desert going back 3,330 years ago that led to this chain reaction of disaster, then we can flip it all over. And then Tisha B'Av will be a day of feasting and partying on the Beis Hamikdash. And hopefully, guys, we have a few more days that will happen, so in which case, I'll see you up on the Temple Mount, doing up some shlomim and some korbanot with the Kohen Gadol. Guys, you should have seen in our days. If anyone wants a card to my website, all my content is online for free. You can listen, read, and watch. You're welcome to contact me also. My email's there, my WhatsApp number is all there. And hopefully we'll be back in action. I'll be able to teach you guys more live. It's been a pleasure to actually speak to